Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Localization Podcast, episode number 3. It is Saturday for me here in Vancouver. It's 8:30 p.m. and I did a little bit more preparation for this episode. Once again, before I actually pressed the record button, I was moving around, overthinking, am I prepared to do this? And stuff like that. So let's just get right into it. For those of you who are listening this for the first time, or in case you missed it before, one of the main reasons why I decided to start this podcast is so that I can practice speaking without preparation, just try to formulate my thoughts in the best possible way. And so here it is. So for this episode, I think this one will be a lot more better and valuable than the episode number 2, where I didn't add a lot of extra comments on top of the articles that I pretty much just read. So this time I changed the approach a little bit. I tried to go through the articles and kind of take notes for each one so that I can kind of rephrase it so that it doesn't totally look like I'm just stealing the content from Slater. And the second thing is... Wait, is there a second thing? I'm actually not sure. Yeah, this time I also have some comment that I spotted on the social media. So that's a good thing. And yeah, the second thing that I actually wanted to say before that was that most of the articles that were presented on Slater for the past week, I actually have something to say about them. So let's get right into it. The very first article will be a short one because it's once again about financial results or M&A, the business stuff that I usually don't have much to say anything about it. So just briefly, the first one is about a Japanese company called Rozetta, and they published their Q1 earnings, and their revenue is up by 50% compared to the previous year. And the company is heavily invested into machine translation, and their machine translation business tripled. So that's 3 times more than previous year, and now it makes up to half of their revenue. And according to the article, they had significant improvements in the machine translation quality, and that's why they're shifting their strategy towards MT-only world. And also, the article mentioned that they had 5 business lines before, and now they just narrowed it down to 3 business lines, which is machine translation, human translation, and crowdsourcing. So machine translation already, as you know, pretty much all the episodes that I did before, so that's actually just 2, they talked about machine translation. So I said it in the last episode that this is definitely something that's coming at us, and I'm still kind of wondering how practical is the application of all these machine translation services. If you're an LSP, do you just go to these companies and you just purchase their service? Is it a subscription-based service, or do you just buy their model and then you train it on your own with your data, or how does it work? I have absolutely no idea. What is the practical aspect of machine translation? And it just happens that one person who is founder of an MT company, he contacted me on Reddit, so in touch with him, and he might actually be the very first guest for this podcast. So I would be very much happy about it if I could share like his experience and his knowledge with the rest of you, because I assume that most of you who are actually listening to this podcast have pretty much the same technical knowledge about machine translation as I do, and that is a very limited knowledge. So it would be really interesting for us to get more details on how this process actually works, and what is like actually the business model for these companies that are working on these MT engines or MT models. So that was the first article. Second article is about the company that allows us to waste a lot of time and not being productive, and that is Netflix. And this article was about the subtitling process. So before I get into the details, I want to mention that I was at some point, I think it was before I left Thailand and I went to Poland, I was interviewed for Netflix for a position in Singapore. I think it was in Singapore, but unfortunately I did not get the position. Not sure why I even mentioned this. Anyway, so the article was first started by saying that in 2 years, Netflix added a lot more languages to their service, and now their content is available in 27 languages worldwide. And in the same period, that's 2 years, their subscriber count grew by 50%. Now, this could be a little bit misleading because we don't know if all of that growth is because of the availability of localized content. So it would be nice if Netflix actually published some, or maybe they did, I just didn't look into it because the article on Slater was my only source of information. So it would be interesting to see like how many of these new subscribers actually consume the content in non-English format. So that's about the numbers. And I think this article was based on a conference that Netflix had in California. And it was like a panel discussion with some of the key members of the localization team of Netflix. And then the article mentioned that the subtitling process begins with a script which serves as a guide for the translators. And Netflix is using their own tool called the originator for the whole subtitling process. And then there was this mention about, let me actually quote this, I have to find it here, about how they deal with the priorities. Now, where is it? Yeah, okay, here it is. They describe how the team is able to track priority projects within the originator. Stuff that is flowing through will drop to the bottom, but we can easily see unassigned, critical, or overdue tasks. So that's all they said about their process. Just few words, but from the description, to me it sounds like their process is very kind of like streamlined, and they just pay attention if something shows that it needs like an action from someone from the team. Otherwise, it just flows continuously. So I assume that they just automatically publish the English script, and it goes automatically to their freelancers. And if there are any issues, it gets flagged and somebody takes an action. And it's definitely something that I like, because like as long as everything is like within the kind of like ideal or the right flow or workflow, then you as a project manager don't actually need to interfere with anything. Then there was an interesting part about licensing, and this was about the content that is not owned by Netflix and how it works. And from the answer from one of the members of the localization team, they mentioned that the licensing also clearly defines in which countries they can show the content, whether they have right to the subtitles or no. And the important thing was regarding subtitles that they actually have to use the ones from the content owner. So for example, if there are streaming content created by Disney, they also have to use their subtitles. The workaround that they use is that they can kind of like propose changes to the subtitles so that it kind of like fits the Netflix kind of like style, but it has to be approved by the content owner and then kind of like reposted back to Netflix before they can use it. The final part of the article was related to tech, and it said that they are using speech to text to generate the English template or the English script, and they are investigating the usage of machine translation for this purpose. But they said that so far they haven't found a solution that would fit, that would be better than their current solution. And this is something that kind of like triggered me, because, I mean, not triggered me, like pissed me off, but kind of like reminded me of what I talked in the first episode. That was like what will be the role of translators once machine translation gets on par with the human translation quality. And this is actually one of the areas that maybe the translators would still be needed, because translating something like a movie or TV series, it requires like a lot of creative translation and creative output, which I'm not sure if the MT will get to. I mean, let's say eventually it will get to, but it will be kind of like the second or third stage. It's not like translating documentation, like click here, select this, and blah blah blah. So yeah, that was the second article about Netflix subtitling, and let's get into the third article, which was actually a sponsored content from Memsource, and it was about their mobile application that they're releasing. And they said that the CAT and TMS tools on the market have not been optimized for mobile. And I'm actually not sure if this is true, but it is true that I have actually never heard that any of our freelancers or translators that I worked before would actually be translating on their mobile phone. So I'm not sure like what kind of solutions SDL has for translating on mobile, but this is kind of similar to SDL Language Connect, which was, I think, part of the episode 1, and they were saying like it's like the first all-in-one solution, you know, for project management, for machine translation, for translation management system, and it's a CAT tool all-in-one. And they said like there has never been all-in-one solution before. So I'm wondering if this is again a similar case, that it's either just like marketing, so it's like not true, or The second question would be, why is a mobile solution coming only now? It's 2019 and it's July 2019, so the mobile and the dominance of mobile has been here for quite some time, and especially with localization moving towards more agile approach where you get like a lot of small requests here and there. Translating on mobile kind of definitely fits that shift. So I'm actually wondering like what the translators would think about this solution and whether it's still something that's feasible for them. Because, for example, if I think about what I do, I still prefer to have like a regular computer. I can see myself doing like some work on the go or on the mobile, like when I'm in the commute or whenever. But the article mentioned that the main kind of like a focus of the mobile translation would be shorter translation requests, and you can also do post editing and review in the app. So I guess like for some smaller pieces, let's say that you have like a service which helps translate, I don't know, posts like on social media or like customer inquiries. So that's like a small content, and you could just run it through machine translation and send it out to your crowd of translators, and using their mobile app wherever they are, they just approve it or they like suggest a change. And this is like a very simple thing, so that's why I was like earlier wondering why such a solution wasn't available on the market before. And actually, like even GlobalMe is kind of doing something in that space when it comes to crowdsourcing. So that was the third article, and let me get some water. Article number 4, and this is the last one that I picked from Slater.com, is about Google's Google's massive multilingual neural machine translation. So when I was first reading this, because it starts with massive multilingual, so I thought it was like MMO. So this is NMT. So we have even more acronyms to use. And what does a multilingual NMT mean? It was explained in the article. So what it means is that you are training just one model for all languages versus having one model trained just for one language pair. And the benefit, according to the article, is that it reduces the training time and cost, and it simplifies deployment in production systems. Okay. So what is Google's goal with this initiative? I think the article said that they were working on it for 5 years, and this whole article was based on a white paper or something like that they recently published. And so back to their goal is to build a universal NMT capable of translating between any language pair. Now, the reason why it's called massive is because this model is supporting 103 languages, and it was trained on over 25 billion examples. And I'm not sure if this like one example equals basically one string. And I think it means like one example equals one sentence. It's not like an article. Now, the next thing that I learned from the article was because you're basically mixing data from different languages, you kind of like have a conflict between, and they call it low resources versus high resources languages. So high resource language would be the one for which a lot of data is available, compared to low resource language, and that is the one that doesn't have that many data. And of course this has a certain impact, and the impact is that the high resource languages can actually perform slightly worse because they're affected by the low resource languages, while on the other hand, the low resource languages are going to be better because they benefit from the training that the model gets from the high resource languages. That's how I understood this. And so there was one kind of like a suggestion in this article, like how to use this, and it's called transfer learning, and that is to use the data from the big pairs, so that means the high resource languages, to improve the quality for small pair languages, while on the other hand, for the high resource languages, you would have one model for each language so that the quality doesn't get worse. But in any case, now I'm kind of stuck. I have no idea what I wanted to say. So yeah, this article was kind of like, I learned a little bit from this article. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm really hoping to get someone from the MT community on this podcast so that we can all learn a little bit more about it. Because right now, to me, it's kind of like a black box. You know, like everybody's talking about machine translation, but like what is the practical aspect of it? Like how you can actually start using it if you are like, I don't know, like an enterprise client, or if you're just like a small LSP, like a very local translation agency. Would you benefit from it? Like, what are the costs? Like, do you need something? So these are the questions that I have no answer to, but I hope that I will be able to provide answers from someone who understands the topic. Because like I mentioned earlier, it looks like machine translation is like coming big, and it's going to hit us at some point. So these were the 4 articles from Slater that I picked. There were a couple more. I think one of them was about VCs, again, putting money into machine translation startups and stuff like that. So it means that there will be more and more solutions for MT. So I'm not sure how fragmented the market will be and what it means, because like, again, I have no idea like how this works from practical point of view. And the other article, I think, was kind of like Slater's research on translation companies or LSPs in Switzerland. And I think it's like a report that you can maybe buy from them, just to see how the market is in Switzerland. So not that important for me. So that covers Slater. I want to now quickly talk about social media, because this is something that I promised before. It's part of the description of this podcast, but I have never actually delivered on this promise. So this time I did a little bit more research. I'm going to start with Facebook because that's an easy one. And I think I mentioned this in the previous episode. I joined this group called, I think it's called Localization Professionals or something like that. And it's run by people from Loggers. They're the ones who created it, and they're the ones who administer the group. And I recently found out that they also are the owners of the largest group on LinkedIn called Localization Professional. But I'll get to that later because I was just admitted to the group this week. So the Facebook group, going back to them, there is absolutely nothing. The content is pretty much usually from them, so promoting law gurus, and the other posts that I found in the group, it's not very active, first of all, and second of all, the other posts were again kind of like a self-promotion. Then I try to look for the localization hashtag on Facebook, and it showed mostly my own posts. So I'm not sure if it's that I, for some reason, cannot see the other public posts that were made with this hashtag, or whether it's really that nobody's actually using it on Facebook. And I think it could be the second option, because in my opinion, and from what I've seen, like Facebook is like not the right person to, not the right place and the right platform to talk about localization. Second platform I want to cover very quickly is Reddit. And on Reddit, I also mentioned this earlier, there is one localization group which is called simply Localization, and it's also full of links to articles on LSP's websites or their white paper, and there's like a very little I'm losing my voice, sorry. And there's a very little like actual meaningful discussion going on. And there was only one new post, and it was kind of like it was a question somebody was asking about LQA. So yeah, that was a funny thing, because there was a guy who was saying, I'm not sure if it's a guy or girl. There was a person who was saying that they manage localization in the startup for a software company or like an app company, and they were asking about how to do LQA. So when I was ready to kind of like respond to the article, there was already one reply, and the person basically asked like, what do they mean by LQA? What do they mean a linguistic QA, which means QA before the translations get into the product, or what do they mean kind of like a functional QA on the localized product after the translations were integrated into the app. And because the reply from the first person seemed very reasonable, I didn't reply any further, because the OP replied to this comment saying just thank you. He didn't specify like what actually he was asking about. So to me, it seems kind of like a waste of time to provide any more feedback on that. Man, I'm talking for like 30 minutes, and it's really drying out my throat. So that was Reddit. Oh, by the way, for Reddit, I had this on my backlog for some time, and I actually started my own subreddit, which is called Localization No BS. So I'm planning to post some content of my own there without linking it to to my own pages. What's wrong with my voice? Without linking it to my own pages, and hopefully it will be kind of like a cleaner subreddit where every post would be valuable and kind of like original content, so that it doesn't look like that spam that's on the main localization subreddit. So that's that about Reddit. Let's move to LinkedIn, because I didn't see much happening there either. So I I checked the localization hashtag and I found nothing interesting. Then I checked the localization professional group and I also didn't find anything useful there. I think I replied to one comment that I found in the group earlier this week, as soon as I got approved into the group, and that person was asking about how people manage and track their localization projects, whether they use Excel, Trello, or any localization specific tool. I also mentioned that I really liked using Excel before when we had these long-term projects that lasted like 6+ months, and it was definitely way easier to track projects that way versus using Microsoft Project. And Trello, of course, I love Trello. I use it personally for my own stuff, whether it's like YouTube or podcasts or whatever I do outside of work. But of course, it's not that robust solution for actually running like a whole localization department through Trello. So that was my reply. And then there was another guy who also replied to the same comment. I think they have like some solution which they say is like, again, this one integrated platform. And I think they are actually based in Toronto. So I replied to them that I'm kind of like interested and would like to know more. So that person said, yeah, he'll be happy to speak with me. And then I replied to him to DM me. But I told him that I'm not like a prospect, that I'm just like curious about their solution, especially compared to SDL Language Cloud. And so we'll see if that person replies. And if he does, I'm going to again try to put him on this podcast so that we can all learn something new. Or maybe if it's a demo, maybe I'll just do like a video and I'll ask questions and we'll see how it goes. So I'm actually really excited like about the opportunity of having guests on this podcast, and I just need to get the first guest, I think. And then based on the result, maybe I will completely shift the focus on just interviewing people. Although I do like doing this like solo podcasting, except not now, because my throat gets really dry and itchy. I'm still kind of not fully recovered from the cold that I had 2 weeks ago. So anyway, and the final platform that I checked is surprisingly Twitter, and I got two very interesting posts that I saw there. So I was just on Twitter, I was just looking at the post for localization hashtag, and I saw this posts kind of frequently from this company which is called Level Up Translation, and they do localization for games, which is something that I always wanted to try, because I used to like games. I still like games. I love games. I was a gamer since my early ages, and even though I was working in localization for 14-15 years now, I have never ever worked on any game localization. And so I thought that like combining my passion for games and my expertise in gaming, I would be a pretty good fit. But when I actually tried to apply for jobs in games, I was rejected many times because I had like zero experience in games localization. And I don't think that like it's such a totally different world than localizing, I don't know, software or marketing stuff or any other usual things. So, but enough about me. So I like their posts that they have on Twitter. Their kind of like thumbnails are like very consistent. Though I noticed that their images are not optimized for social media. So many times the text, and which is the main thing that should capture your attention, is truncated. So I DM them and let's see if they reply. And if they reply, maybe I will again, no, not maybe, I will definitely ask them like if they would be interested in joining my very little small podcast with almost no audience. If you're listening to this and you're my audience, congratulations to you. It must be a very painful experience, but thank you for listening. So that was the first thing. And the second thing, and this is a big thing. So while I was browsing through all the posts and scrolling down, I noticed this image in the shared articles which were from Metal Gear Solid. And I saw it a few times, then I saw it again and again. So this article was shared a lot on Twitter. And so then I finally clicked it, and it's an article on Polygon. And it's about a person who worked on the translation for Metal Gear Solid. And for those of you that don't know anything about games, there's this one Japanese guy called Hideo Kojima, and he has this like a legendary status of creating games that have like a very exciting narrative and story, and his storytelling is like very acclaimed. Is that the right word? Acclaimed. And so Metal Gear Solid is actually a game that I played on PC, though it's not the main platform that Metal Gear series was created for. Those are Sony platforms, sorry. So I played this game, and it was definitely one big experience, especially from the story point of view. Like all the cutscenes, all the dialogues, everything is great. And so this is a guy who had to translate the game from Japanese to English. And I'm going to try to quickly, because the article is like very long and I didn't take notes, which is shame on me when I was reading the article, but there are some very nice, interesting parts that I want to mention about the role of a translator in such a task environment. So the person who wrote this article and who was translating this game first mentioned that he only worked on some smaller games before, and then I think he had 6 months to translate the whole game. And he had to basically understand the whole world that Hideo Kojima created in Japanese, because the whole game has a lot to do about, now where is that thing? Yeah, so here it is. There was all this military tech throughout the game, including specific gun names and details about how US nuclear weapons are locked down, background on the Cold War, Alaskan native tribe, special ops, psyops, you name it. And these were things that I knew nothing about when I started work on the translation. Yeah, and this is another interesting thing. People may have a hard time really appreciating the fact that at the time, the internet was not the thing you know now. There was no YouTube, no Wikipedia, no Reddit, and there were no other translations of similar work to reference. The word localization barely existed in the business in 1997. I was all on my own and no one was looking over my shoulder. I ordered every book I could by an ex-Navy SEAL named Richard Marcinko, who wrote the autobiographical book Rogue Warrior, along with a collection of novels. I had a sense that that's what Kojima was going for. A gritty feeling of realism with touches of James Bond's gadgets and inventiveness. So then the article mentions about all the research that the translator had to do, which is something that you don't see a lot happening these days. I'm not sure if for games it's still happening, but the content that I'm usually exposed to, like nobody would give you like 1 or 2 weeks to do research on a certain topic. So this is the most interesting thing that I wanted to bring up in this segment, and that is the author said, this is, let me just quote this. This is a good time to talk for a minute about translation and the idea of originality. Many people misunderstand this topic, and it's not surprising. There's not much solid information about how this process works, and there definitely wasn't during the time period I was working on Metal Gear Solid. Translation is not a science, it is an art. One must take liberties with the text to capture the essence of the words in an attempt to recreate the feeling of the original for a very different audience with a very different cultural background. The rest of the article is kind of like not like a self-promo. The author still says that he thinks he did a great job, and based on what he's writing, I think he actually did a great job, because talking about like, I don't know, special ops soldiers and nuclear weapons in Japanese, probably, and the way that Kojima probably creates a narrative in his own language can't just be, translated 1-to-1 into English. So that's what the author was saying, that he had to do like a lot of research about the topics, like nuclear weapons, special ops soldiers and stuff like that, and try to use their jargon and how it would be used by, let's say, American people. So this amount of research is something that I have never experienced before, and it's really fascinating for me. And the article ends with the fact that at some point Hideo Kojima, the great creator, actually found out, because he wasn't bilingual, he found out that this translator kind of like altered the script here and there, to basically adjust it and make it better for the English audience. And Kojima actually didn't like it, so that's why he stopped working with this guy, which is kind of a shame. And there was like one example of like future translations of the game that really sounded awkward in English, and they basically had to be, they would be better if the translation was kind of like more creative rather than trying to stick to Japanese. So yeah, I really like the part where he says that translation is not a science, it's an art. And this again brings me to the topic of machine translation versus translators, and this is another area where translators could still keep their expertise and domain and not be, pushed out by the machine translation. And it's the same thing as translating scripts for Netflix. Whether it's Netflix or if it's a game, especially maybe game might be more challenging for machine translation to do actually a good job. especially when the game kind of like creates its own world and speaks like a certain language or style. And I think I'm getting mixed in my thoughts. I'm trying to think like what else I could add, but I guess I'm just kind of like not saying anything useful. So I think this is where I'm going to end the podcast. We are closing 50-minute mark, and I'll have to get to the editing, which will be a long night because I actually did mess up some parts here and there. There are a lot of silences, and my voice is kind of like losing its power here and there because like my throat starts to get itchy and low. Anyway, so in this episode we had 4 articles from Slater. We look at some of the interesting events, or not events, more like updates from social media. And I talk about Polygon's article about Metal Gear Solid translation, which I hopefully, if I don't forget, I will link it at least on my YouTube video, because it's a definitely interesting article that you should read, especially if you are a translator or you care about translators, at least in a little bit. Okay, so that's going to be it for episode 3. If you got to this point, thank you very much. I appreciate your time with me. Hopefully you learned something and it was not suicidal for you to listen to my voice for 50 minutes. Thank you, everyone, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.